Putting a bow on development camp, I got 3 players that stood out to me more than any at Sabres Development Camp. I'll let you know who they are when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Alrighty, welcome into the Locked On Sabres podcast. Sneaky Joe DiBiase, and I am excited for today's show. A lot to get to, including development camp, wrap up 3 standout players from development camp that I want to focus in on. Comments made by Don Granato after development camp, and a couple of interesting things he had to say about the Sabres blue line that is worth mentioning on today's show. And I'll tell you why I am still in on Brett Pesci as a trade idea for the Buffalo Sabres. All that is coming your way here on the Locked On Sabres podcast at Sneaky Joe Sports. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're not yet on Threads, but we'll get there pretty soon if you're looking for your Twitter alternatives these days, like many are. But a lot to get to on today's show. And again, feel free to reach out to us at Sneaky Joe Sports or comment section on YouTube, another good way to get involved with the program. So, before we get to development camp, we had the 3-on-3 tournament on Thursday. We had practices throughout the week as well. And I thought there were a lot of good moments. You know, Zach Benson right at the forefront. His team wins the championship in the 3-on-3 tournament. And spoiler alert, he's one of my 3 standouts, but I'll get to him a little bit later on. So, Gavin McCarthy, not one of my 3 standouts. Local kid from Clarence, I thought had a nice camp. Ryan Johnson, a little bit older player, of course, also. So a good overall camp. It was hot in Buffalo this week, right? 88 degrees, humid, hazy, smoky, just not the most ideal conditions, if you ask me, for being outside. And yes, I know I say that as someone that has clearly gotten some sun this week with the the 4th of July. But nice week to be indoors. I think the weather actually maybe helped you go inside. Let me go to Harbor Center. Let me get into that cool rink. You might even need a sweatshirt when you were in the rink like I did. So cool week to have it right after the draft. And now, the Sabres have a bit of some off time. Everybody does. The prospects, the players, the coaches, everybody, as we get into the dry season of the NHL calendar. So before we get to development camp, though, Don Granato spoke with the media after camp. And, he did get asked, of course, and talked about the prospects and what he liked and what he saw. But I think the most notable 2 things that Granato talked about was, one, Jack Quinn. And Don Granato, sounded how you might think he'd sound on Jack Quinn, said that Quinn will be better for this and that he will pick up things watching the team from above. And Granato said he'll be working a lot one-on-one with Quinn off the ice, meetings daily, film watching, trying to help him grow as a player, even though he won't be on the ice for the first couple months of the season. I watched a Jack Quinn highlight video that was like 10 minutes long. I think the Royal Report was the one on YouTube that put out the highlight reel. And I was watching Quinn's best moments from last year and reminding myself of why I think he was the Sabres breakout candidate for this season before he got injured. The hands, the speed, the shot, it was really coming on strong. I'm not gonna lie, I'm depressed still. A week later, I'm still depressed about the idea that Jack Quinn is not going to be there for the first couple months of the season. And then, we'll see what kind of form he's in at the end of the season. But I really thought there was a huge year coming for him, and maybe there still is. But that was interesting. The one-on-one time he's going to have with Quinn. Quinn will be around, daily meetings, watching the team from above. So that was the first interesting thing. And then Granato did not sound like I thought he would on the Sabres blue line and their defensive additions. Of course, the Sabres signed Connor Clifton, Erik Johnson in free agency, and Granato gets the question about them. And a couple of things that he talked about that I wasn't expecting. One, Granato, and I think Joe Marino from the Charging Buffalo actually pointed this out even before I did, that Granato sounds more willing or has more of an appetite to pair left shot D with right shot D on a defense pairing. And typically, he has been a coach that doesn't care about that. Now, maybe that's because of the options he's had that he hasn't cared about it, but he's not really ever cared too much about that. Dahlin and Samuelsson are two left shot defensemen that play great together on the top pairing. And Owen Power logs a bunch of minutes as well. Most of the Sabres minutes come from left shot defensemen. And I don't know whether or not he'll include Dahlin as a left guy or a right guy. Dahlin is a left shot defenseman, but to me, has always played better on the right side. I don't know if Granato agrees with that. He didn't really go in depth on it. But he sounded more willing to want to go to a left shot. He said the words. It's more natural for a left shot defenseman to play with a right shot defenseman. He said those words, and I'm not sure I'd ever heard them have that admission before. The other thing Granato had to say about the blue line, he sounded more like Erik Johnson's going to start in the top four than I thought he would. A lot of talk about Johnson. He mentioned Johnson, the possibility of him playing with Dahlin. Mentioned the possibility of him playing with Owen Power. And the way he sounded on Johnson, who he was more willing and wanting to talk about even than Clifton, his experience, how great a player he's been in the past. I don't know. I think it sounded to me like Johnson is going to be the guy that gets the first crack at the top four. I don't know that it'll last even past the first game, but that's at least how it sounded to me. Talked about him on the penalty kill as well. Clifton and Johnson improving the penalty kill, and he expects that those two are going to do that. Very good shot blockers, experienced players in that area. So I think he is tasking those two with improving the Sabres penalty kill, which we know was dreadful last year in a lot of ways. So a couple of headlines I thought from Granato's time with the media this week. When we come back, my 3 standouts at development camp. 1 obvious one and 2 under the radar Sabre prospects that I want to get to when we come back. That's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20. You'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to have the first home run of the game, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Sabres podcast with Sneaky Joe here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. To development camp, the Sabres get through some practices and then the 3-on-3 tournament. Watched a lot, if not all, of the 3-on-3 tournament and then watched it back a little bit as well. And I've got 3 standouts for you, not just from the 3-on-3 tournament, but for development camp overall. And not everybody was participating, of course. Your Isaac Rosines, your Yuri Kuliks, your Devin Levi's. Not everybody was participating. The entirety of the Sabres draft class from this past draft last week was participating. A couple other guys from past drafts that were standouts as well. The #1 guy, let me get him out of the way. Zach Benson, first round pick of the Sabres last week. Everyone is saying he is the #1 prospect already for the Sabres. All the prospect guys are putting him right to the top of the list as the Sabres' #1 prospect. And I don't think that's crazy in any way. And he really showed off at camp. I mean, the hands that were on display during the drills, you could see the skating agility and you could see the hands and you could see the shot. You could see the offensive ability that was on display with Zach Benson and the creativity that was on display. Man, he really screams Datsuk to me. Until a prospect guy tells me I'm wrong for comparing Benson to Datsuk, that's the guy I'm running with. We hear a lot more of a Braden Point comparison for him, which is, a high accolade as well. But until I hear otherwise, I am running with Datsuk as his comparison. And like Datsuk, the defense was notable. In the tournament is when we really saw, him as the pickpocketer. Coming up from behind a guy, stick lift, swipe, and he's back the other way before that player can even turn around. So fast, so quick at creating turnovers. And that is something you can only show off so much in a drill that he really showed fans, I think, in the 3-on-3 tournament. So Zach Benson was incredible. His team won the tournament, the 3-on-3 tournament. He was the standout. So number one for me has got to be Zach Benson. Two more under-the-radar prospects that I thought were standouts for the Sabres during development camp. Number one, number two, I should say, after Benson, Nikita Novikov, a 6th-round pick of the Sabres in the 2021 NHL draft. Russian prospect, actually made the Russian World Junior team last December, and had 5 assists in 7 games. Actually, no, excuse me. That was his world. It was 18. That was his World 18 tournament stats from the year before. Only played 2 games for the World Junior tournament for Russia, and then the tournament was canceled. So, looking back at Novikov's Hayes development camp, big defensive defenseman. He is 6'4", already 200 pounds. Like, he's a good size player among the guys out there. He's one of the bigger guys. Pretty good puck skills. I mean, really jumping up in the play in the 3-on-3 tournament. That's where I thought he might get exposed a little bit. All the open ice, the 3-on-3, him being a more defensive defenseman. But he really did play well, I thought, and he really kept up. He made a lot of good, stick checks. Jumped up in the play when he needed to. Scored a goal. Had another really nice assist. So threw his weight around a little bit on the offensive end. Still, I think, a defensive defenseman. His EP Rinkside profile says on defense, he uses his raw size to take up a lot of space, block lanes, get his stick in wherever he can. And you can see that for sure. But this guy is really coming on as a Sabre prospect. And this development camp, I think, was just another sign of that. He makes the Russian World Junior team. That might be sign number one. A 6th-round pick is doing that. And then we start to learn more about this guy and what happened at that draft. And, we hear from the Sabres even. Kevin Adams this week spoke about how Novikov would have went rounds earlier had teams knew he'd come over from Russia. And that has now happened. He's going to play for Rochester this year. And I'm very excited to see what he can do for Rochester on the blue line, because he might be tracking towards becoming an NHL defenseman right now. If he was going to go rounds earlier, if you knew he was going to come over and now he came over, well, now it feels like, did they get a 2nd-round guy, 3rd-round guy, that they got a huge value just because of where he played and the question mark of whether he would ever come over? Well, here he comes, Nikita Novikov, and it sounds to me like he might be the number one defenseman in the Sabres organization for prospects. I'd like to ask one of the Sabre prospect guys. Maybe we'll have one on next week to ask that question. He'd be being compared to Ryan Johnson, Maxim Strebak, who they've picked in the 2nd round, Gavin McCarthy, who they've picked in the 3rd round. Novikov might outrank them all as the number one prospect in the Sabres organization that's not yet with the NHL team. And I thought he was really good at camp. Not that fast, not the best skating skills, but I wouldn't say he's also got bricks for skates or anything like that. He's good enough in that department to really utilize his skating or to utilize his puck skills and his defensive skills otherwise. So Nikita Novikov, thought he had a really good camp, and his momentum is building towards eventually becoming an NHL defenseman, but he'll be with Rochester this year. 109 games of KHL experience, by the way, for Novikov. So he already is a little bit above the curve for his age. At 19 years old, he already has 109 games of KHL experience. And typically, guys of his age are playing in the MHL, which is below the KHL as the 2nd-tier league. My number 3 prospect that stood out at development camp, another Russian, Aleksander Kisakov. Another Russian prospect. He was a 2nd-round pick of the Buffalo Sabres, 53rd overall in that 2021 NHL draft, the same draft where they picked Novikov. He's also, by the way, dubbed for Rochester this year. He played in Rochester last year, 48 games played, only 6 goals, 2 assists, very inconsistent all year for Rochester. Did not play in the playoffs. He had not earned a spot on the roster for the playoffs. But year 2 now in North America, year 2 in Rochester, and another year where he could put on some more weight. And Kisakov was as small as it gets for an NHL draft pick. he was listed at 5'10", 150. 150 pounds when he showed up to the Sabres organization. So another offseason to put on a little bit more weight. And I think you could tell, I mean, he's still not bulky. He's still very slender, very, skinny. Still only 20 years old. But I think he's put on more weight than certainly what he was listed at when he came into the Sabres organization after he was drafted. Rochester listed him actually last year at 160. So he had put on 10 pounds in that year. And I think he maybe has put on another 10 pounds, maybe another 15 pounds. Just a guess. I don't know what he weighed in at. I didn't see weights or anything for development camp, but Kisakov looked bigger. And that's good because his number one attribute to me is his skating. He is fast, very agile, very quick skater, very quick feet. So that makes him very good side to side with his edge work and his agility. The skating is on display for sure with Kisakov. Very good hands, pretty decent shot. Nothing crazy with the shot, but good enough. The hands is good, and the skating is incredible as well. 2 goals, 4 points for Kisakov at the 3-on-3 tournament. I saw Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic tweet out that stat line, and I was impressed by him at the 3-on-3 tournament. A lot of open ice, is right in his wheelhouse, that 3-on-3 tournament with all the skating room that he had. So I thought Kisakov was really good all week long, and I think the 3-on-3 tournament even more so for him because of his style of player. I think it was perfect for his attributes. So Aleksander Kisakov, another player that I might not want to project right now that he becomes an NHL player, but it's getting more interesting with him that he could become that. Pair him with Prokhor Poltapov and, those Russian prospects they drafted in the 2021 class. I think the odds are one of them is going to develop. It just might be a question of who. And Kisakov, I thought, had a strong showing in this last week. So what I'd be looking for from him is a giant step forward in Rochester. He had 6 goals and 8 points in 48 games played last year. What I'd like to see from Kisakov, make it so that when the playoffs show up, you're in the lineup and you're an important player in the lineup. That's what I need to see from Aleksander Kisakov this year. He put on the weight. He's getting stronger as a player. He's got the experience now. 48 games played in North America, 48 games played in Rochester. Go produce. Go be a contributor. Don't be a guy that's just here because we don't really have any other place to put you. That was a little bit of Kisakov's season. Was they wanted him here. They didn't want him in Russia with all that's going on over there. They wanted him here and developing. But there really was nowhere else to place him other than Rochester. So don't be a guy that's just there because we need to put you somewhere. Be a contributor. So double-digit goals at least. Maybe a 40-point campaign would be a nice bar to set for Kisakov. That's what I'd want to see from him if he's got any future as an NHL player. I think we need to see a big-time step from him with the Amherst this season. By the way, just as a reminder of what kind of player we're talking about with him, from someone that isn't me, the Elite Prospects draft guide from a couple years ago described him as there's a lot of pace and creativity in Kisakov's game, attacks the neutral zone with crossovers, tracing, weaving patterns that veil his intentions from defenders. He closes the gap with them. He abruptly cuts one way, forcing them to cross their feet or pivot to match his turn, and then explodes in the opposite direction, gaining the zone to fire on net. So pretty much what I had to say, the cutting ability, the agility, the skating is the number one thing that you're going to notice with Kisakov and that I noticed from Kisakov at development camp. Novikov, Benson, Kisakov, my 3 standouts from Sabres Development Camp. Quickly, when we come back, I want to remind everybody why I am still in on the Brett Pesci trade idea. I still believe that could happen. I'll tell you why when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Welcome back to the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase, and thanks for making us your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Brett Pesci, I think, is still on the trade market. So there was a rumor from Elliot Friedman that Pesci had the Sabres on his no trade list. And that it kind of feels like it should be dead, right? And there was a rumor about the Predators being interested, and we go on with Brett Pesci. But what I wonder is, Can the Sabres get Carolina to convince him to waive his no-trade clause for the Sabres? Now, they'd have to have the best offer in the first place to do that, but I wonder if they can convince Pesci that the Sabres is the best idea for him and that they'll pay him. 1 year left, $4.1 million. And Carolina, I think they're going to trade him. There are rumors now that they're going to sign Vladimir Tarasenko. That's another big contract potentially on their books. They got to pay Sebastian Aho. They got to pay Teuvo Teravainen. If they want to pay Brady Shea, they got to do that. They got to pay Stefan Nuisen, Jack Drury if they want it, Seth Jarvis. Martin Nikas is coming up next year. They got big money to give away. And I don't think Pesci is going to be a part of that. So they're going to move him. And that especially, I think, even gets doubled down on when they signed Dmitry Orlov to a $7.7 million deal to add to their blue line. So the Sabres got to have the best offer. And then they got to convince Pesci. So there's a long road here. But the trade I just think makes too much sense is Brett Pesci for Henri Jokiharju and a first-round pick. Jokiharju at a smaller cap number, I think would be enticing to Carolina, can replace Pesci in the lineup or further down the lineup, but save Carolina some cap and get them some cap relief. And the first-round pick value, I think, is smart as well. But again, Pesci's got a big no-trade list. That's the other thing. 15 teams. I wonder where the Sabres rank on the 15 teams. We know that the Sabres have been taken off no-trade lists more and more as time has gone on here in the last year. So when was that no-trade list submitted? Okay, that's the first interesting question. And two, how high on the list were they? Were they the number one team he listed? Because then there's no chance you're going to convince them to come here. But was he kind of starving for teams at the end? Maybe there's only real 5 teams that he didn't want to go to, but he's got a list of 15. You might as well submit 15. So that would be the conversation I'd want to have. Did you only put the Sabres because you had to list 15? And of course, you're going to get to Buffalo if you list 15, but maybe they were 12th on your list, 13th on their list. Or I should say the 12th team that you listed. That's what I would wonder. I don't know that, so I'm pure speculation when I say that, but I wonder if that trade can still be had. But the Sabres would have to do a little bit of work in convincing him that this is the best offer. We're going to give you the contract you want. We're going to give you the role you want. You're going to pair with Owen Power for the next 5 years, and you're going to be a stud. We're going to make the playoffs. Erik Johnson, Connor Clifton, they're starting to gain more of a reputation where they can convince these good veterans to come here. And I think, I'd like to see that tested with a Brett Pesci because I think he fits perfect for what the Sabres need. Good in his own end, historically, not as much last year. Good puck mover and, can log a bunch of minutes on the Sabres second pair. And I would like him a lot better than Erik Johnson or a Connor Clifton for that role. All right, we'll see. And maybe there's something still to be had with Brett Pesci. Anyways, that's going to do it for me today on the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you got a thought on anything we had to say today, feel free to reach out at Sneaky Joe Sports, at Locked On Sabres, or on the podcast account on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next week here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.